The static crackled through the operations center at 3:47 hours, and Major Ryan Kellerman assumed it was another malfunction. The entire firebase had been on edge for 72 hours, ever since the recon team went dark in the mountains northeast of Kandahar. Satellite imagery showed nothing. Drones reported thermal signatures consistent with enemy movement, but the terrain was a labyrinth of caves and ridges that swallowed radio signals whole. Kellerman had sent 2 Apache gunships at dawn. They returned with bullet holes and empty hands. Now, as he stared at the tactical display, watching red icons multiply across the screen, he heard something that made his blood stop cold. A call sign he hadn't heard in 6 years. Dust Devil to Firebase Monarch, requesting immediate clearance for close air support. Grid November Foxtrot 7321, danger close, troops in contact. The voice was calm, almost bored, as if calling in an airstrike on her own position was just another Tuesday. Kellerman's hand froze over the radio. Dust Devil. That couldn't be right. Dust Devil had been grounded after the inquiry. Dust Devil had been stripped of flight status and buried under a mountain of paperwork that ensured she'd never touch a stick again. And yet there it was, clear as oxygen, cutting through the static like a blade. He glanced at Lieutenant Ramos, whose eyes were wide with recognition. "Sir, that's—" "I know who it is," Kellerman interrupted, his jaw tight. He keyed the mic. "Dust Devil, say again your position and aircraft type." There was a pause, just long enough for him to wonder if he'd imagined the whole thing. Then the voice returned, and this time there was a thread of something else woven into the calm. Not fear, not urgency, something older and sharper. "Firebase Monarch, this is Captain Evelyn Moss. Call sign Dust Devil, flying A-10 Warthog, tail number 794. I have eyes on 15 hostiles moving to overrun your recon element. They have approximately 4 minutes before they're overrun. Do I have clearance or do I go Winchester on my own authority?" Kellerman felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made press down on his shoulders. Evelyn Moss, the pilot who'd disobeyed a direct order to save a downed crew. The pilot who'd been called reckless, insubordinate, a liability. The pilot who'd put her career on the line because she believed the rulebook mattered less than the lives it was supposed to protect. He looked at the screen. The red icons were moving fast. "Dust Devil," he said slowly, "you are cleared hot. God help us both." The A-10 rolled into the canyon like a shadow with teeth, its nose dipping just enough to give Evelyn a clear view of the ridgeline where the insurgents had dug in. She could see muzzle flashes, tiny pinpricks of light against the dark stone, and below them, barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, the scattered shapes of American soldiers pressed flat behind rocks that wouldn't stop bullets for long. She'd been flying for 3 hours, ever since she'd intercepted the distress call on an unencrypted frequency that someone had been foolish or desperate enough to use. The base had disavowed knowledge of any operation in this sector. The official channels had gone silent, but Evelyn knew the sound of men dying, and she knew the sound of radios being smashed under boot heels to keep them from falling into enemy hands. So she'd turned her aircraft toward the mountains and broken every regulation in the book. Again, her hands moved across the controls with the muscle memory of 10,000 hours, flipping switches, adjusting trim, bringing the weapons system online. The Warthog was old, older than most of the pilots flying it, a relic from a war that had supposedly ended decades ago. But it was built for one thing, and it did that thing better than any aircraft ever made. It killed tanks, and when there were no tanks, it killed everything else. "Dust Devil, Firebase Monarch, be advised you have fast movers inbound, ETA 12 minutes, Kellerman's voice crackled through her headset. "Can you hold until they arrive?" Evelyn glanced at her fuel gauge, then at the scene unfolding below. 12 minutes. The soldiers didn't have 12 minutes. They didn't have 12 seconds. She keyed her mic. "Negative, Monarch, I'm making my run now." She didn't wait for a response. The Warthog dropped like a stone, air screaming over its wings, and Evelyn's world narrowed to the gun sight and the trigger. This was what they'd try to take from her. This moment, this clarity, this singular purpose. She'd been grounded, debriefed, questioned by men in clean uniforms who'd never smelled cordite or felt the shudder of a 30mm cannon. They'd called her a cowboy. They'd said she didn't respect the chain of command. What they'd really meant was that she didn't respect their comfort with letting men die while they waited for permission. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared to life with a sound like the earth splitting open, a deep, guttural brrrrrt that shook the airframe and sent a stream of depleted uranium rounds screaming downrange at 4,000 feet per second. Evelyn walked the burst across the ridgeline, watching stone explode into dust and bodies tumble like broken dolls. The insurgents scattered, some diving for cover, others simply ceasing to exist as the rounds found them. She pulled up hard, banking left to come around for another pass, and that's when she saw the technical. It was a Toyota Hilux with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, and it was racing toward the American position from the east, kicking up a rooster tail of dust. The gunner was already swinging the weapon toward her recon team. Evelyn didn't think. Thinking was for people on the ground. She nosed down, lined up the shot, and let the cannon speak again. The truck disintegrated. One moment it was a vehicle, the next it was a fireball and a cloud of shrapnel spreading across the desert floor. She rolled inverted to check her six, saw nothing but empty sky, and keyed her radio. "Monarch, Dust Devil, Ridgeline is clear. I'm making another pass to confirm." "Copy that, Dust Devil. Recon team reports they're mobile. You just saved 8 lives." Evelyn didn't respond. 8 lives. The same number she'd saved 6 years ago when she disobeyed orders and turned back for that down helicopter. The same number that had earned her a reprimand instead of a medal. She wondered if Kellerman remembered. Probably. He'd been the one to write the report. The warthog climbed, circling the valley like a predator waiting for something to move. Below, she could see the soldiers regrouping, moving toward the extraction point with the jerky, exhausted movements of men who just stared death in the face. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came from caring too much about people she'd never meet. They'd pin names on them later, rank and serial numbers, but right now they were just shapes in the darkness, and she was the only thing standing between them and the void. The sun broke over the mountains as Evelyn brought the warthog back to orbit, painting the peaks in shades of copper and gold. She could see the extraction helicopter now, a black hawk threading through the valleys with its rotors kicking up curtains of dust. The pilot was good, staying low, using the terrain. Smart. She checked her fuel gauge again and grimaced. 20 minutes, maybe less. Enough to escort the Black Hawk out and make it back to base with fumes in the tank. She'd deal with the consequences then. There would be consequences, there always were. "Dust Devil, this is Recon 2-3. You are officially my favorite person in the entire world." A new voice crackled through her headset, young and shaky with adrenaline. "We thought we were done." "Recon 2-3, Dust Devil, stay frosty until your wheel's up," Evelyn replied. "You're not done until you're drinking beer in Germany." "Copy that." "Hey, Dust Devil, can I ask you something?" Evelyn almost smiled. "Make it quick. Is it true what they say?" "About Fallujah," the smile died. Fallujah. Of course they knew about Fallujah. Everyone knew about Fallujah. It was the reason her name showed up in briefings as a cautionary tale, the reason young pilots were told to follow orders and trust the system. It was the reason she'd spent the last 6 years flying cargo runs and training sorties while the real war happened without her. "Recon 2-3, focus on your extraction. We can swap stories later." "Roger that." But the kid had already opened the door, and memory came flooding through whether she wanted it or not. Fallujah, November 2019. A Marine unit pinned down in a building that was collapsing under mortar fire. Command had ordered her to stand off, to wait for reinforcements that were 30 minutes out. 30 minutes the Marines didn't have. So she'd gone in anyway, flying so low that her landing gear scraped rooftops, and she'd lit up every enemy position within 1,000 meters. She'd saved 43 lives that day, and when she landed, they'd taken her wings. The Black Hawk lifted off in a storm of rotor wash, nose tilting forward as it gained speed and altitude. Evelyn stayed high and wide, watching the surrounding ridges for any sign of movement. The insurgents had scattered, but they weren't stupid. They knew how to wait, how to hide, how to take one last shot at a target of opportunity. She wouldn't give them that chance. Her radar was clean. Her fuel was critical. Time to go home. "Monarch, Dust Devil, Recon element is clear. I'm RTB." Copy Dust Devil. General Carver wants to see you the moment you land. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. General Marcus Carver, the man who'd signed off on her grounding, the man who'd looked at her across a desk and said, "You're a hell of a pilot, Moss, but you're a liability to everyone around you." She wondered what he'd say now, probably the same thing. Men like Carver didn't change their minds just because the rules had proven inconvenient. They doubled down. They found new rules. Understood. Dust Devil inbound. The flight back to Bagram was silent except for the steady thrum of the engines and the whisper of wind over the canopy. Evelyn let her mind go quiet, the way she always did after combat. There would be time for emotion later, time to process the adrenaline and the fear and the sick exhilaration of knowing she'd just killed people and saved lives in the same breath. For now, she was just a pilot bringing her aircraft home. The Warthog touched down with a screech of rubber and the whine of thrust reversers. Evelyn taxied to the hardstand, shut down the engines, and sat in the sudden silence. Her hands were steady. They always were. It was only when she climbed down from the cockpit and saw the crowd waiting for her that she realized how much trouble she was in. General Carver stood front and center, his face carved from stone. Behind him, a dozen officers and NCOs, some curious, some hostile, all watching. And standing slightly apart from the rest, arms crossed, was Kellerman. His expression was unreadable. Evelyn snapped to attention, her flight suit still reeking of sweat and hydraulic fluid. She didn't salute. You didn't salute in a combat zone where snipers might be watching and old habits died hard. General Carver stepped forward, his boots crunching on the tarmac. He was tall, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of command decisions. He stopped 2 feet away and studied her with eyes that missed nothing. "Captain Moss," he said quietly. "Sir. Were grounded 6 years ago. You have no authorization to be in this theater. You certainly have no authorization to be flying combat missions." He paused. "You stole that aircraft." Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over his shoulder. "Yes, sir. You violated restricted airspace, ignored direct orders from this command, and engaged enemy forces without clearance." "Yes, sir. You risked a multi-million-dollar aircraft and your own life for a mission that wasn't yours to fly." "Yes, sir." Carver's jaw tightened. For a moment Evelyn thought he might explode, might unleash the kind of parade ground fury that made lieutenants wet themselves. Instead, he did something worse. He smiled. It was a thin, bitter smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Major Kellerman tells me you saved 8 men this morning. Men who would be dead right now if you hadn't disobeyed every order I've ever given." "I didn't do it for you, sir." The words were out before she could stop them. She heard someone behind Carver suck in a breath. Evelyn braced for the storm, but Carver just nodded slowly as if she'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. "No," he said, "I don't imagine you did." He turned and gestured to Kellerman, who stepped forward holding a tablet. "These are the after-action reports from Recon 2-3. They're calling you a guardian angel. They want to put you in for a silver star." Evelyn said nothing. Medals meant less than nothing when you couldn't fly. Carver seemed to read her mind. "I'm not going to court-martial you, Captain. God knows I should. But I'm not going to pin a medal on you either." The general pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up so Evelyn could see the seal embossed at the top. It was official, whatever it was, probably discharge papers, probably the end of everything she'd ever cared about. She'd known this moment was coming for 6 years. She just hoped it would arrive after she was too old to care. "This is a reinstatement order," Carver said. "Effective immediately, you're back on flight status. Full clearance, full authority. You'll be assigned to the 442nd Fighter Wing, where you'll be doing exactly what you did this morning, except with permission and backup." Evelyn blinked. The words didn't make sense. She replayed them in her mind, searching for the trap, the fine print, the catch that would snatch it all away. "Sir, I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to salute and say, 'Yes, sir,' and get your ass back in the cockpit where it belongs." Carver stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I grounded you because I thought you were dangerous. I thought you cared more about your own judgment than the lives of your fellow soldiers. I was wrong." He glanced toward the horizon where the mountains still smoldered. "Or maybe I was right and the world's just gotten dangerous enough that we need people like you. Either way, you're back. Don't make me regret it." Evelyn's throat was tight. She managed a nod. "Yes, sir." Carver turned and walked away without another word, the crowd parting for him. Kellerman remained, arms still crossed, studying her with an expression that was equal parts respect and wariness. "You should have waited for the fast movers," he said. "I know. You could have gotten yourself killed. I know. But you didn't, you never do." He shook his head. "I wrote the report that grounded you, Moss. I stand by every word. You're reckless, you're insubordinate, and you're the most dangerous pilot I've ever met. But those men are alive because of you." He offered his hand. "Welcome back, dust devil." Evelyn shook it, feeling the weight of 6 years lift from her shoulders. Not all of it, never all of it, but enough. The 442nd Fighter Wing operated out of a forward base, so bleak it made Bagram look like a resort. It was a collection of prefab buildings, sandbag fortifications, and a single runway that had been carved out of the desert with explosives and stubbornness. The warthogs sat in reinforced hangars, their noses pointing toward the mountains like hunting dogs on a leash. Evelyn arrived at dawn, her duffel slung over one shoulder, and immediately understood that she was walking into a boys' club that didn't want her. The pilots were gathered outside the operations shack, drinking coffee and trading stories. They went quiet when they saw her. Not hostile exactly, just watching, measuring. She'd seen that look before. It was the look men gave women in uniform when they couldn't decide if she was there because she'd earned it or because someone had checked a diversity box. It was the look that said, "Prove it." She didn't break stride. She walked past them into the operations shack, dropped her duffel, and found the duty officer, a captain named Vance with a sunburn and a permanent scowl. Captain Moss reporting for duty. Vance looked up from his paperwork, his scowl deepening. "You're the one who stole the warthog. I borrowed it. You violated about 15 regulations doing it. 16, actually. I checked." Vance stared at her for a long moment, then grunted something that might have been a laugh. "Your bird's in Hangar 3. Crew chief's name is Ortiz. He's been working on it since you brought it back full of bullet holes." Evelyn felt a flicker of something that might have been guilt. "It flew fine." "It flew on prayers and spite, Captain. Ortiz found hydraulic leaks, a cracked fuel line, and damage to the right aileron that should have put you in the dirt. You're either the luckiest pilot alive or the craziest." "Can it be both?" Vance almost smiled, almost. "Get out of my office, Moss. Briefings at 0800, don't be late." Hangar 3 smelled like jet fuel, grease, and the particular brand of profanity that only aircraft maintainers could achieve. Evelyn found her warthog sitting in the center of the bay, surrounded by toolboxes and diagnostic equipment. It looked worse than she remembered. Scorch marks from the cannon, bullet holes in the tail, a chunk missing from the left wing where something had come too close. And standing beneath it, wrench in hand, was a short, stocky sergeant with forearms like bridge cables and an expression that suggested he was contemplating murder. "You must be Ortiz," Evelyn said. The sergeant didn't look up. "You must be the pilot who thinks my aircraft is invincible." "It's not invincible, it's just stubborn." "Stubborn." Ortiz threw the wrench into a toolbox with a clang that echoed through the hangar. "Lady, this bird should be in a museum. Half the systems are held together with duct tape and the good Lord's mercy, and you bring it back looking like it lost a fight with a cheese grater." Evelyn walked over and ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rough edges where shrapnel had torn through aluminum. "But it got me home. This time. Next time, you might not be so lucky." Ortiz pulled a rag from his pocket and wiped his hands. "I've been working on warthogs for 15 years. Seen them take hits that would down any other aircraft, but even they have limits. You need to respect those limits." "I do respect them, I just don't let them stop me." Ortiz studied her for a moment, then grunted. "You're dust devil, I heard about Fallujah. Everyone's heard about Fallujah." "Yeah, but I was there. I was the crew chief for the unit you saved. I watched you fly through hell and back, and I watched them take your wings for it." He held out his hand. "So here's the deal, Captain. I'll keep your bird flying. I'll make sure every system is green, every weapon is loaded, every bolt is tight. But you don't get to break my aircraft and call it borrowing. You treat her right or we're going to have problems." Evelyn shook Ortiz's hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the unspoken promise. Crew chiefs were the backbone of military aviation, the unsung saints who kept aircraft in the sky through sheer willpower and midnight shifts. If Ortiz was on her side, she just gained the most valuable ally on the base. "Deal," she said. "Good, now get out of my hangar. I've got work to do." The briefing room was exactly what she'd expected. Folding chairs, a projector screen, a map of the region covered in grease pencil marks. The other pilots were already seated, 8 men ranging from mid-20s to early 40s, all wearing flight suits and expressions of casual arrogance. They looked up when she entered. One of them, a lanky captain with a call sign patch that read HAWKEYE, grinned. "Well, well, the infamous Dust Devil, heard you like to play cowboy." Evelyn took a seat in the back row. "Heard you like to talk instead of fly." A few of the others laughed. Hawkeye's grin widened. "I like her. She's got bite." The squadron commander entered before Evelyn could respond. Lieutenant Colonel Briggs was a compact, no-nonsense officer who looked like he'd been carved from granite and polished with sandpaper. He surveyed the room with eyes that had seen too much and forgot nothing. "All right, people, listen up. We've got tasking from CENTCOM. Enemy forces are massing in the Korangal Valley. Intel suggests they're planning a major offensive against Fob Blessing. Our job is to provide air support and keep them from getting within artillery range." He clicked a button, and the projector displayed a satellite image of rugged mountains cut by narrow valleys. "The terrain is murder. SAMs reported in the area, possible AAA emplacements. This is not a milk run." Briggs's gaze settled on Evelyn. "Captain Moss, since you're new to the squadron, you'll be flying wing for Captain Hayes. Call sign Hawkeye. He'll show you how we do things around here." Hawkeye turned in his seat and gave Evelyn a mock salute. "Try to keep up, Dust Devil." The mission brief continued for another 30 minutes, covering frequencies, altitudes, attack patterns, rules of engagement. Evelyn absorbed it all, filing away the tactical details while watching the way the other pilots interacted. There was an ease to them, a camaraderie built over months of flying together. She was the outsider, the unknown variable. She'd have to earn their trust one sortie at a time. When the briefing ended, the pilots dispersed to their aircraft. Evelyn found Hawkeye waiting for her on the flight line, his warthog already being pre-flighted by his crew chief. "So here's how this works," Hawkeye said, his tone somewhere between friendly and condescending. "You fly my wing, you follow my lead, you do exactly what I tell you. We're a team up there, and teams don't work when someone decides to go rogue." "I don't go rogue," Evelyn said evenly. "I do what's necessary." "Yeah, I've heard that before, usually right before someone gets killed." Hawkeye climbed up to his cockpit, then paused and looked down at her. "Look, I don't care what you did at Fallujah, I don't care what the general says. Up there, you're just another pilot, and if you screw up, you'll get us both killed. So check your ego at the door and fly smart, got it?" Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Got it. Good, wheels up in 20. She walked to her aircraft where Ortiz was finishing the pre-flight. He gave her a thumbs up, and she climbed into the cockpit, settling into the seat that had become more familiar than her own bed. The instruments glowed softly in the pre-dawn light. She ran through her checks with the precision of a surgeon, every switch, every gauge, every system exactly as it should be. This was where she belonged. Not in an office, not at a desk, not on the ground where politics and regulations turned war into a bureaucratic nightmare. Here in the cockpit, with the smell of jet fuel and the promise of violence, she was exactly who she was meant to be. She closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the stillness settle over her. Then she keyed her mic. "Dust Devil ready." The warthogs lifted off in pairs, their turbofan engines screaming as they clawed for altitude. Evelyn slotted into position on Hawkeye's right wing, maintaining a loose tactical formation as they headed northeast toward the Korangal. The sun was fully up now, turning the mountains into jagged shadows and the sky into a canvas of impossible blue. Radio chatter was crisp and professional. Hawkeye called out checkpoints, adjusted their heading, coordinated with the AWACS aircraft orbiting somewhere high above. Evelyn listened and responded with the minimum necessary words. Action spoke louder than talk, and she intended to let her flying do the speaking. 30 minutes into the flight, the radio crackled with a new voice. "All hog elements, this is Overlord. Sitrep from Fob Blessing. Enemy forces confirmed moving through the valley. Estimate 500 combatants mix small arms and heavy weapons. CAS requested, coordinates to follow. Hawkeye acknowledged and glanced over at Evelyn's aircraft. She could see him through his canopy, his helmet turning toward her, assessing. Then his voice came through her headset private channel. "You ready for this, Dust Devil? This isn't some rescue mission. This is a shooting gallery." "I was born ready," Evelyn replied. "Cute, just remember I'm flight lead. You engage when I tell you to engage. You break when I tell you to break. No heroics." "No heroics," Evelyn echoed. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Heroics weren't something you planned. They were something that happened when the world went sideways and the rulebook became irrelevant. They descended into the valley like hawks dropping on prey, their altitude decreasing as the terrain rose to meet them. Evelyn could see the fob now, a cluster of fortifications perched on a hilltop, surrounded by wire and watchtowers. And beyond it, threading through the ravines and gullies, she could see movement. Lots of movement. "Overlord Hawkeye, we have visual on enemy forces, requesting clearance to engage." "Hawkeye Overlord, you are cleared hot. Danger close. Watch your fire." Hawkeye's voice was calm, almost bored. "Copy. Dust Devil, follow my lead. We're going in low and fast." The valley walls rose on either side like the ramparts of a fortress, close enough that Evelyn could see the texture of the rock, the scraggly trees clinging to impossible slopes. Hawkeye dove first, his warthog dropping like a falcon, and Evelyn followed, her heart rate steady, her hands light on the controls. Below, the insurgents were scattering, some diving for cover, others raising weapons toward the incoming aircraft. Too slow. Far too slow. Hawkeye opened fire, his cannon tearing into a cluster of fighters near a dried riverbed. Bodies flew apart. Dust and smoke erupted. Evelyn lined up her own target, a group of insurgents trying to set up a mortar, and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared and the mortar team ceased to exist. She pulled up hard, banking right to avoid the ridgeline, her vision graying at the edges from the G-forces. The aircraft groaned but held. Ortiz's work. She made a mental note to buy him a beer. "Good kill, Dust Devil," Hawkeye said, coming around for another pass. They worked the valley like surgeons, methodical and precise, walking their fire through enemy positions and turning the battlefield into a charnel house. The insurgents fought back with everything they had: machine guns, RPGs, even a few shoulder-fired missiles that streaked upward trailing white smoke. But the warthogs were too fast, too maneuverable, and the pilots were too good. Evelyn felt the old rhythm settle over her, the combat trance where time slowed and the world narrowed to target, trigger, maneuver. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was just acting, reacting, letting her training and instinct guide her. This was what they'd tried to take from her, this clarity, this purpose. "Dust Devil, Hawkeye, break left, Sam, launch." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She slammed the stick left and dumped flares, the aircraft rolling inverted as the missile screamed past, close enough that she could see the smoke trail. Her heart hammered once, hard, then settled. Close, too close. She rolled upright and keyed her mic. "Hawkeye, I'm tracking the launch site. Permission to engage." There was a pause, then Hawkeye's voice, tight with something that might have been respect. "Granted, light them up." Evelyn rolled inverted again, her eyes tracking the faint smoke signature rising from a cleft in the rocks. The SAM team was reloading, tiny figures moving with frantic urgency. They'd gotten off one shot. They wouldn't get a second. She nosed down, the altimeter unwinding, the ground rushing up. At 500 feet she fired, the cannon spitting death, and the cleft erupted in fire and falling stone. She pulled up so hard the airframe shuddered, climbing back into the sky, adrenaline singing in her veins. "SAM site neutralized," she reported. "Confirmed," Hawkeye replied. "Damn Dust Devil, remind me not to piss you off." The battle lasted another 20 minutes. By the time Overlord called them off, the valley floor was littered with wreckage and the enemy force had disintegrated into scattered survivors fleeing into the hills. The fob was secure. The mission was a success. And Evelyn, for the first time in 6 years, felt like she was home. They climbed out of the valley and turned south, the warthogs settling into cruise formation. The radio was quieter now, the adrenaline fading, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion that came after combat. Evelyn's hands were steady, but she could feel the tremor waiting beneath the surface, the body's delayed reaction to nearly dying. "Dust Devil, Hawkeye, go ahead. You flew good today, real good." Hawkeye paused, and when he spoke again, there was no condescension in his voice. "I was wrong about you. You're not just another pilot, you're one of the best I've seen." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest, respect, acceptance, the things she'd been chasing for 6 years without realizing how much she needed them. "Thanks, Hawkeye, that means a lot. Don't let it go to your head, you still owe me a beer." "Deal." The flight back to base was uneventful. The sun was high now, the desert shimmering with heat, and Evelyn let herself relax into the seat. She thought about the men she'd just saved, the ones at the fob who would go home to their families because she'd been there. She thought about the ones she'd killed, the insurgents who'd chosen violence and paid the price. War was ugly. It was brutal and unforgiving and morally complex in ways that kept philosophers and politicians arguing for centuries. But up here at altitude, with the wind screaming over the canopy and the world spread out below like a map, it was also simple. Protect the innocent. Destroy the enemy. Bring everyone home. That was all that mattered. Debrief was short and professional. Lieutenant Colonel Briggs walked them through the mission timeline, highlighting what went right and what could be improved. Evelyn sat quietly, absorbing the feedback, watching the other pilots as they relaxed into post-mission banter. Hawkeye kept glancing at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When Briggs dismissed them, the pilots filed out, but Hawkeye lingered. "Moss, you got a minute?" Evelyn nodded. "Sure." They stepped outside into the brutal afternoon heat. Hawkeye pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and offered the pack. Evelyn shook her head. She'd quit smoking years ago, but she understood the ritual. Cigarettes were a way to mark time, to process, to come down from the high of combat. "I wanted to apologize," Hawkeye said, exhaling smoke. "I gave you a hard time earlier. It wasn't personal." "Yes, it was," Evelyn said. "And that's fine, I get it. New pilot, a reputation, a woman in a squadron that's probably never had one before. You wanted to see if I'd fold." Hawkeye studied her through the smoke. "You didn't fold." "I don't know how," he laughed, a genuine sound. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that." He took another drag. "So what's the story? Why'd they ground you? I've heard the rumors, but I want to hear it from you." Evelyn leaned against the wall, her eyes on the distant mountains. "Fallujah. I disobeyed a direct order to wait for reinforcements. Flew into a hot zone without clearance, engaged enemy forces, saved 43 Marines. Command decided I was a liability." "And were you a liability?" "Depends on who you ask. The Marines I saved think I'm a hero. The colonels who wrote the reports think I'm insubordinate. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle." Hawkeye flicked ash onto the ground. "I think the truth is that you don't care about the rules when lives are on the line. That's dangerous, but it's also why you're a hell of a pilot." Evelyn didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Hawkeye finished his cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "Welcome to the 442nd, Dust Devil. Try not to get us all killed." The weeks blurred together after that, each day a carbon copy of the last. Briefings, missions, debriefings, maintenance, sleep. Evelyn flew almost every day, sometimes twice, her warthog becoming an extension of her body. She learned the terrain, memorized the valleys and ridges, understood the patterns of enemy movement. And slowly, grudgingly, the squadron accepted her. It started small. Hawkeye inviting her to join the poker game in the rec tent. Ortiz teaching her how to troubleshoot a balky hydraulic system. Lieutenant Colonel Bry